Sometimes $5 can change the fate of 3 lives forever. Billy walked through the newly acquired property with firm steps, kicking up small clouds of dry dust with every move. The midday sun punished mercilessly, turning the barren land into a natural furnace that tested any man's endurance. His worn-out boots knew that kind of terrain well. Decades of working the land had shaped not only his calloused hands, but also his resilient character. The property he had just bought for a derisory sum promised to be the new beginning he had been looking for. The wooden hut loomed on the horizon like a mirage distorted by heat. Its time-faded tablets told tales of harsh winters and unforgiving summers. The roof featured some loose shingles, and the front porch hung slightly to one side, as if the entire structure was tired of fighting the elements. Billy observed every detail with the experienced eye of someone who knew how to recognize what still had value and what needed to be rebuilt. The dry wind carried the characteristic aroma of mugwort and parched earth. In the distance, a hawk glided in lazy circles, taking advantage of the thermal currents that rose from the heated ground. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional creaking of the wood of the hut, which protested against the expansion caused by the intense heat. Billy stopped before the main door and noticed that it was ajar. A warm breeze poured in through the opening, causing the tattered curtains to dance softly in the gloomy interior. He had bought the property from a merchant in the city that had assured it had been empty for months. The natural distrust of one who had lived long enough in the West caused his hand to move instinctively toward the revolver he carried in his belt. The porch steps groaned under his weight as he approached the entrance. Through the crack in the door, he could glimpse pieces of the interior plunged into darkness. The smell emanating from inside was a mixture of old wood, accumulated dust, and something more subtle that he could not identify. Maybe it was just his imagination, but there was a sense of life in that place that should be dead. Billy pushed the door slowly, causing the rusty hinges to protest with a high-pitched squeal that echoed through the empty interior. The sunlight created a golden rectangle on the weathered wooden floor, revealing footprints in the dust that were definitely not his. The farmer's heart raced slightly. It wasn't fear exactly, but rather the caution learned through years of dealing with unforeseen situations. The interior of the cabin was larger than it appeared from the outside. A main room stretched out in front of him, with a stone fireplace occupying part of the opposite wall. Some furniture covered by dusty cloths spread throughout the room, like silent ghosts of a life that once existed there. The floor creaked softly beneath his feet as he moved forward, each step echoing in the heavy silence. It was then that he heard it, a sound so low that it almost went unnoticed. Respiration. 2 distinct, rhythmic, deep breaths from somewhere further down the cabin. Billy stopped immediately, all his senses on high alert. His hand found the handle of the revolver, but he didn't draw it yet. Decades of experience had taught him that not every surprise meant danger. The breaths were coming from what seemed to be the master bedroom. Billy moved toward the sound with the caution of a predator, each step calculated not to make unnecessary noise. The bedroom door was closed, but a glimmer of light filtered underneath it, indicating that there was a window on the other side. The farmer positioned himself next to the entrance and, with extreme care, turned the handle. The door opened, revealing a scene he would never forget. On a makeshift mattress on the floor, 2 figures slept hugging, a brown-haired woman and a small child, both too thin, with clothes that have known better days. The light that came in through the framed window created a golden halo around them, giving an almost sacred quality to this moment of peace in the midst of so much desolation. The woman awoke first, as if some maternal instinct alerted her to the strange presence. His eyes opened slowly, still clouded by sleep, until they fixed on the figure of Billy standing in the doorway. For an instant that seemed eternal. They just looked at each other. There was no fear in her eyes, just a tired resignation of someone who had already faced too many difficulties in life to be scared by another one. The child continued to sleep, breathing softly against the woman's chest. Billy realized that it was a girl of perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with light hair that contrasted with her mother's. Her clothes were clean, despite being patched, showing the care of a mother who did her best with the little she had. The woman sat down slowly, being careful not to wake her daughter. Her movements were graceful despite her evident fatigue, and Billy noticed that she was younger than she had appeared at first glance. He may not have been over 30, but life had left its marks on his face, giving him a maturity that went beyond his age. The silence stretched between them like a river that neither of them knew how to cross. Billy withdrew his hand from the revolver and took a step back, a small but meaningful gesture that communicated his peaceful intentions. The woman noticed the movement, and something in her posture relaxed slightly. The farmer looked around the room and saw evidence of careful occupation. The few possessions were neatly organized. There were wild flowers in an old tin that served as a vase, and a small improvised altar with a crude wooden cross indicated that this woman had not completely lost her faith, despite the adversities she clearly faced. The moment stretched on, loaded with unexplored possibilities. Billy knew that the decision he made in the next few moments would define not only the fate of these two vulnerable creatures, but also the direction his own life would take. The West had taught him that some encounters happen by chance, but others are orchestrated by forces beyond human comprehension. The girl shifted slightly in her sleep, muttering something unintelligible, and the woman instinctively snuggled her closer. This simple gesture, so natural and full of motherly love, touched something deep in the farmer's heart. It has been a long time since I saw so much tenderness concentrated in a single movement. Billy realized that the time had come to speak, but the right words seemed to escape him like water between his fingers. How to explain that he was the new owner of that land, without sounding like a despot about to expel two helpless souls? How could she communicate that, despite the surprise, she did not feel anger, but rather a growing curiosity about the circumstances that had led this woman and her daughter to seek shelter on her property? The wind outside intensified, causing the cabin to groan softly, as if the structure itself was witnessing this encounter and waiting anxiously to see which direction events would take. Billy finally found the words, his voice coming out softer than he even expected. He explained that he had bought the property that morning and did not expect to find anyone. The woman listened to him in silence, her eyes revealing a mixture of relief and apprehension. When he finished speaking, she sighed deeply and began to tell her story. Her name was Margaret, and the girl was her daughter Sarah. They had lost everything when her husband died in an accident in the mine 6 months ago. Without resources to pay the rent of the house in the city, they were evicted and wandered for weeks until they found that abandoned cabin. Margaret worked occasionally washing clothes for some families in the area, but the money was barely enough for food. The cabin offered at least a roof over their heads during the cold desert nights. Billy listened to every word without interruption, watching as Margaret's eyes filled with tears she struggled to contain. Little Sarah was still asleep, oblivious to the conversation that would determine her future. The farmer felt a tightness in his chest. He was well aware of the hardships that the West imposed on the less fortunate. He had seen many families destroyed by the unforgiving circumstances of that place. The sun continued its unforgiving journey across the sky, and the heat inside the hut became more and more oppressive. Billy suggested they go out to the porch, where at least the occasional breeze offered some relief. Margaret agreed, carefully taking her sleeping daughter in her arms. The girl snuggled naturally against her mother's neck, muttering something about horses in her sleep. On the balcony, daylight revealed more details about the two unexpected guests. Margaret had delicate traits that poverty had not been able to completely erase. His hands, though calloused from hard work, still retained a femininity that awakened in Billy long-dormant feelings. Little Sarah had the same face shape as her mother, but her light hair must have come from her father. Billy offered water from his canteen, watching as Margaret drank with the thirst of someone who wasn't sure when the next opportunity would be. She wet her daughter's lips, who continued to sleep, exhausted by the heat and perhaps hunger. The farmer felt a pang of guilt over his own reserves of food and water, which were plentiful compared to the desperate situation of those two. The conversation flowed naturally as the hours passed. Margaret talked about the life she had had before the tragedy, about how her husband was a good man who dreamed of finding enough gold to buy a small farm where they could raise Sarah safely. Billy shared his own experiences, talking about the years of hard work that had led him to finally buy that property, his dream of raising cattle and building something lasting. As they talked, Billy noticed small details that revealed Margaret's character. The way she instinctively arranged her daughter's hair, how her eyes lit up when she talked about the dreams she had, the dignity with which she carried her difficult situation. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a quiet determination to protect her daughter at any cost. The day wore on, and Billy realized he needed to make a decision. Technically, those two were invaders on their property. Any man would have the right to expel them, but something inside him rebelled against this possibility. Maybe it was the years of loneliness weighing on her shoulders, or maybe it was simply the human decency her mother had taught her before she died. Sarah finally woke up as the sun began to decline over the horizon. Her blue eyes opened slowly, focusing first on her mother's familiar face, then on the stranger sitting next to them. Instead of fear, he showed only childlike curiosity. Margaret introduced her to Billy, explaining that he was the new owner of the cabin. The girl watched him with the typical frankness of children, asking direct questions that drew genuine smiles from the farmer. She wanted to know if he had horses, if he knew how to tell stories, if he liked wildflowers like the ones she and her mother picked in the desert. Billy patiently answered each question, being surprised at how easily the conversation flowed. As dusk approached, painting the sky with orange and purple hues, Billy made his decision. He could not sleep peacefully knowing that he had left a woman and a child at the mercy of the desert and the cold night that was approaching. He offered to stay in the cottage until Margaret found steady work and a place of her own to live. The gratitude in Margaret's eyes was instant and touching. She tried to protest, saying she didn't want to be a burden, but Billy cut her off gently. He explained that the cabin was really empty and that he planned to build a bigger house elsewhere on the property. In the meantime, they could stay there, and Margaret could help with the household chores if she wished to contribute in any way. The proposal seemed to benefit everyone. Margaret would have a safe place to raise her daughter, Billy would have company on her lonely estate, and Sarah could play freely without the dangers of the city streets. The temporary arrangement made practical sense, but both adults realized that there was something deeper going on between them. That night, Billy set up camp under the stars, a respectful distance from the cabin. The fire he lit cast dancing shadows all around, and he wondered if he wasn't making a mistake. He knew men who had been ruined by impulsive decisions of the heart. But when he looked in the direction of the cabin, where a soft light shone in the window, and where he knew that two people would finally sleep safely, he felt that he had made the right decision. The night wind brought with it the characteristic sounds of the desert. Coyotes howled in the distance. Nocturnal insects created a subtle symphony, and occasionally the distant neighing of wild horses was heard. Billy remained awake for a long time, stargazing and thinking about how drastically his life had changed in a single day. Inside the cabin, Margaret also had trouble sleeping. She held Sarah asleep against her, marveling at the unexpected kindness of this man. There was something about Billy that inspired confidence, a solidity she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was too early to think about such things, but she couldn't help but wonder if this chance encounter could be the beginning of something new for both of them. The days that followed established a comfortable routine. Billy worked during the day, repairing fences and exploring his new property, while Margaret took care of the house and Sarah. In the evenings, they would dine together on the porch, talking about future plans and sharing stories from the past. Sarah quickly became attached to Billy, who discovered that he had a natural patience with children. The farmer realized that his solitary property was turning into something resembling a home. The flowers Margaret planted around the cabin brought color to the arid environment, and Sarah's laughter echoing through the air made everything more alive. It was as if that place had been waiting for them to fully awaken. The weeks that followed brought subtle but significant changes for everyone. Billy found that having Margaret and Sarah around aroused protective instincts in him that he didn't know he possessed. He began to worry more about details he had previously ignored, such as making sure there was enough wood for the cold nights, or that there was no shortage of fresh water during the hottest days. Margaret, for her part, flourished in that safe environment. The constant tension she carried on her shoulders began to subside, and Billy noticed that she smiled more often. Their meals became more elaborate, turning simple ingredients into savory dishes that filled the cabin with welcoming aromas. It was evident that she found pleasure in taking care of them, as if she had finally recovered a purpose that tragedy had taken away. Sarah has adapted to her new life with the natural ease of children. He explored the property with infinite curiosity, collecting colored stones, chasing butterflies, and inventing games with sticks and dried flowers. Billy often found her building small towns in the sand or talking seriously with the animals that occasionally visited the property. The girl had brought a lightness to that place that he didn't know he was missing. During the warmer afternoons, when working in the sun became impossible, Billy began to spend more time in the cabin. He initially justified his presence with minor repairs that needed to be made, but soon realized that he was simply looking for excuses to be close to Margaret. Their conversations deepened each day, revealing layers of personality that they had both kept guarded for too long. Margaret displayed a keen intelligence that had been underestimated by her predicament. She could read and write, something rare for women in her position, and had well-formed opinions on a variety of subjects. Billy was surprised at how easily she understood the practicalities of the farm, offering valuable suggestions on raising cattle and cultivating the arid land. The attraction between them grew naturally, manifesting itself in small gestures and prolonged looks. Billy began to notice how the evening light highlighted Margaret's hair, how her hands moved gracefully when she explained something to Sarah, how her genuine laughter completely transformed her face. Margaret, for her part, observed the kindness with which Billy treated her daughter, the patience she showed in teaching her about the animals and plants of the desert. One event in particular marked a significant change in their relationship. During a sandstorm that lasted 3 days, everyone was confined to the hut. The wind howled outside with a force that made the structure tremble, and the sand penetrated through all the cracks, creating an almost apocalyptic atmosphere. Billy remained in the cabin to ensure Margaret and Sarah's safety, sleeping on the floor of the great room. During these 3 forced days of closeness, the formal barriers between them began to crumble. They played cards by candlelight, told stories to entertain Sarah, and shared childhood memories that they rarely revealed to others. Billy talked about the loneliness he had felt since the death of his parents, about how he had devoted so much time to work that he had forgotten to build meaningful relationships. Margaret confessed her fears about raising Sarah alone, her doubts about being strong enough to protect her daughter from the dangers of the world. It was during the second night of the storm that it happened. Sarah had fallen asleep among them on the makeshift mattress they had set up in the main room, away from the windswept windows. Margaret and Billy talked in whispers so as not to wake the girl, their faces lit up only by the faint glow of the embers on the fireplace. The moment became intimate without either of them planning it, and when their eyes met, they both realized that something fundamental had changed between them. Billy reached out and gently touched Margaret's face, removing a strand of hair that had escaped from her simple hairstyle. She did not turn away, and for a moment that seemed eternal. They remained so, silently acknowledging the feelings that had grown between them. The kiss that followed was soft and hesitant, loaded with months of shared loneliness and the promise of something new beginning. When the storm finally passed, leaving the air clear and the sky a crystal blue, everyone left the hut as transformed people. Billy and Margaret didn't speak directly about what had happened between them, but the change was palpable in every gesture, in every look exchanged. Sarah, with the children's keen perception, noticed that something was different and seemed to completely approve of the new dynamic. Billy began to think seriously about the future. His original intention to build a larger house elsewhere on the property was abandoned. Instead, he began making plans to extend the existing cabin, adding rooms and improving the structure. His dreams now included not only the success of the farm, but also the happiness of Margaret and Sarah. Margaret also felt the change in her perspectives. For the first time since her husband's death, she could imagine a future that wasn't just about survival. She began to dream again, visualizing the possibility of a stable and loving life for herself and her daughter. The guilt she carried for her growing feelings for Billy gradually gave way to the acceptance that she had the right to seek happiness again. The seasons began to change, bringing cooler nights and shorter days. Billy installed a better heater in the cabin and made sure there were enough provisions for the coming winter. Their actions demonstrated a commitment that went far beyond temporary hospitality. He was building a shared life, even without having verbalized his intentions. During one of those cold nights, while Sarah slept in her newly built room, Billy and Margaret finally had the conversation they both knew was necessary. Sitting before the fireplace, with the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, Billy expressed his feelings with the simple honesty that characterized his nature. He talked about how Margaret and Sarah had filled a void in his life that he didn't even know existed. Margaret responded with equal sincerity, admitting that her feelings for Billy had grown far beyond gratitude. She confessed that she had begun to see him not only as a generous benefactor, but as a man she was falling in love with. The conversation flowed naturally into discussions about the future, about the possibility of making official the union that already existed in their hearts. Billy mentioned his intentions to propose to Margaret, but wanted to make sure she was ready for that step. He knew the difficulties a widow faced in remarrying, especially in the West, where the opinions of the community could be harsh. Margaret reassured him, saying that his first priority would always be Sarah, but that she believed Billy would be a wonderful father to her daughter. The decision was made that night, sealed with whispered promises and shared plans for the future. Billy promised to give Margaret and Sarah everything they needed to be happy, while Margaret promised to help him turn his lonely estate into a true family home. The love that had grown between them during those months of living together finally found its full expression. As the fire in the fireplace gradually dimmed, turning into embers that glowed softly in the darkness, Billy and Margaret remained embraced, planning the life they would build together. Outside, the desert wind blew gently, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings and second chances that the West occasionally offered to those brave enough to embrace them. Spring arrived, bringing with it a renewal that extended far beyond the arid landscape. Billy worked tirelessly to prepare the estate for the wedding he had planned with Margaret. He enlarged the cabin as he had promised, adding 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Every hammer blow, every board put in place represented his dedication to building a solid future for his new family. Margaret watched the preparations with a mixture of wonder and emotion. There were times when she needed to pinch herself to make sure she wasn't dreaming. The transformation in his life seemed almost impossible to believe. From a desperate widow sleeping in an abandoned hut, she had become the future wife of a good, hard-working man with a home of her own and the security to raise her daughter. Sarah was active in the preparations, helping her mother sew the wedding dress and decorating the cabin with wildflowers she picked from the surroundings of the property. The girl had developed a genuine love for Billy, who reciprocated with all the fatherhood her heart could offer. It was touching to watch as he crouched down to talk to her on the same level, listening to her childish concerns seriously and answering her questions with infinite patience. The preparations for the wedding were simple but full of meaning. Billy made sure to go to town to invite the pastor and some respectable families in the area. He wanted Margaret to be received into the community with the dignity she deserved, establishing from the beginning that she would be treated as a respectable lady and not as a refugee whom he had taken in out of charity. Margaret's dress was made with fabric that Billy bought especially for the occasion. It was not elaborate, but the light blue color highlighted her eyes, and the elegant simplicity of the cut demonstrated the natural good taste she possessed. Sarah insisted on having a new dress as well, and Billy provided a flowery fabric that made the girl feel like a desert princess. On the morning of the wedding, Billy woke up before dawn, nervous as a boy on his first date. He put on his best clothes, a clean white shirt and dark pants that he had carefully ironed. She looked at herself in the small mirror that had hung on the wall and wondered if she was doing the right thing. The doubt lasted only an instant, dispelled by the certainty that he loved Margaret and Sarah with all the intensity his heart could muster. Margaret also woke up early, but for different reasons. I was anxious, but it was a good anxiety, full of expectation and joy. As she prepared, she thought of her husband she had lost and whispered a little prayer, asking for his blessing for the new life she was beginning. It wasn't betrayal to love again. It was to honor his memory by building the happiness he would have wished for her and Sarah. The pastor arrived at noon, accompanied by some neighboring families Billy had invited. The ceremony was to be held on the balcony of the cabin, overlooking the vast desert landscape that stretched as far as the eye could see. Margaret had decorated the space with wildflowers and simple ribbons, creating a romantic and welcoming atmosphere. When Margaret appeared at the door of the cabin, walking slowly toward Billy with Sarah by her side, holding a small bouquet, the farmer felt that his heart might stop beating. She was radiant, with a smile that lit up her entire face and a newfound confidence that made her look completely transformed. It was the same woman he had found sleeping in that cabin months ago, but at the same time, it was someone completely different. The pastor's words echoed through the silent estate, laden with promises and commitments that Billy and Margaret had been living for months. When the time came for the vows, both spoke from the heart, promising love, companionship, and mutual dedication. Billy promised to be a loving father to Sarah, while Margaret promised to help him turn that barren land into a prosperous and happy home. Sarah had a special role in the ceremony, delivering the simple rings that Billy had bought in town. The girl took her responsibility very seriously, walking slowly and holding the small cushion, as if carrying the most precious treasure in the world. When Billy put the ring on Margaret's finger, Sarah applauded spontaneously, drawing smiles from everyone present. The kiss that sealed the union was soft and full of future promises. When they parted, Billy and Margaret looked around and saw that they had built something beautiful in this formerly lonely place. The guests applauded warmly, and Sarah rushed to hug the two, creating the new family's first official embrace. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Margaret had prepared a simple feast with the resources they had, and the neighbors contributed dishes and music. Someone brought a violin, and soon the children present were dancing on the sand, while the adults chatted and laughed in the golden afternoon sun. Billy observed Margaret interacting with the other women in the community and realized that she naturally integrated into the group. His concerns about her acceptance by the neighborhood proved unfounded. Margaret had a captivating personality that quickly won people over, and her genuine gratitude for the second chance life offered her was evident in every gesture. As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to prepare to leave, Billy and Margaret found themselves alone for a few minutes on the porch. They looked at the property that was now officially theirs. visualizing the plans they had made during the long evening conversations. There would be cattle grazing in the fields, a vegetable garden next to the house, maybe even other children playing in the yard next to Sarah. Sarah ran over to them, exhausted by the excitement of the day, and Billy picked her up without hesitation. The girl hugged him tight and whispered that she was happy to have a real daddy now. The simple, heartfelt words touched Billy deeply, confirming that he had made the right decision to open his heart and home to those two special people. As night fell and the last guests left, the new family gathered on the porch to watch the stars that began to appear in the dark sky. Sarah was nestled between Billy and Margaret, sleepy but reluctant to go to sleep, as if she wanted to savor every moment of that perfect day. Billy thought about how drastically his life had changed since that morning he decided to check out his new property. The $5 he had paid for the cabin turned out to be the best investment of his life, not for the monetary value, but for what that impulsive purchase had brought to his world. He had found not only a home, but a complete family and true love. Margaret held Billy's hand as she watched the stars, marveling at the mysterious paths life sometimes takes. She had gone through so much suffering and despair that she came to believe that happiness was no longer possible for her. But here she was, married to a good man, with a safe home for her daughter and a future full of bright possibilities ahead. Sarah finally fell asleep between them, and Billy carefully carried her to his room. When he returned, he found Margaret still on the porch, with a soft smile on her lips. They embraced in silence, listening to the nighttime sounds of the desert that no longer seemed lonely, but rather a natural symphony that cradled their new life together. The gentle evening wind carried with it the fragrance of the flowers Margaret had planted around the house. The sweet aroma mixed with the characteristic smell of the desert created a unique combination that Billy knew he would always associate with that moment of complete happiness. It was the smell of home, of family, of dreams fulfilled against all expectations. As they prepared for their first night as husband and wife, Billy and Margaret knew they would still face challenges. The West was an unforgiving place that constantly tested the endurance of those who chose to live there. But they also knew that united, they could overcome any difficulty that the future brought. The cabin Billy had bought for $5 became the foundation of a new life, a symbol of how small decisions can change entire destinies. From those simple wooden walls, a family had been born, a true love had grown, and a home had been established that would last for generations. Under the endless stars of the desert, 3 lives have definitively intertwined, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places, and that true love can flourish even in the most arid soils, as long as it is watered with patience, kindness, and the courage to open one's heart to the possibilities that life offers. If you enjoyed this Wild West story, subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming narratives about love, hope, and second chances in the wild heartland of America. Leave your like and share in the comments which part touched your heart the most.